Hey everyone, Rapspank here, and today we have Metacheck January 26th. This is a show where I look at the meta and talk about a couple of decks I find interesting. First off though, sorry for the bit of a lateness of the episode, but I was kind of waiting to see if there was a patch and also still getting used to the new job schedule, so things might be a little bit late on the day, but here we are, still Tuesday, still getting it out when we're supposed to, so let's start with a quick update on last week's On the Grind deck, which was Veimer Control. Now, this one's, it's a great update. A lot of games played. Got a whole 9 extra games on the deck. Sadly, the deck went 3-6. So, that's 33% win record, which brings it to a grand total of 6-8 for a 43% win record, still losing. Now, in fairness to the deck, I messed around with the list quite a bit. Played with a bunch of different cards. I put Sunforger in at one point. Someone mentioned Ballistic Bot, so I figured I'd give it a try. And let me check numbers here real quick. But I think I'm actually 2-3 on the list you're seeing, and I'm 1-3 on the Sunforger list. So, to be fair, a lot of these losses were accumulated on the Sunforger version, which I don't think lines up particularly well with the meta because it is a bit slower. It's great if Zoe Lee Sin didn't exist, essentially, but against the meta, the Sunforger variant is a lot weaker, and Ballistic Bot ended up surprising. Now, here's the real thing, though, is that Ballistic Bot version went 2-3, and the original version went 3-2. So there's an argument to be made that perhaps Spring Guardian is in fact better than Ballistic Bot, and in some ways I kind of feel like that's true. The fact that Ballistic Bot is a lot slower definitely hurt in the Zoe Lee Sin matchup that I played. So I think there's an argument to be made for just sticking with the original list that I presented. That said, I am a little bit surprised with how well Ballistic Bot did do. It is really, really good. It's definitely something you could consider, but I'm not sure I would recommend it over the original Spring Guardian version. But this is definitely a list to look at if you're not quite happy with where the other one was, and then the flex spots I mentioned didn't look that great to you. This is another version that works really, really well. And in fact, the original version with Spring Guardian, I might take this list and just replace Ballistic Bot with Spring Guardian. There's only one other change, but going down a Guiding Touch and up a unit actually feels relatively solid. There's not many points where I'm like, man, wish I had a Guiding Touch here. Whereas there's plenty of points where I'm like, man, I wish I had some unit to play. So the 3 Solari Priestess, 2 Guiding Touch is probably better than vice versa. So that's a change that I'd make. Now about the actual specific matchups. Now our wins were against Teemo Lock, Feel the Rush, which I haven't played against that deck in quite a while, so that was interesting, but we are fairly good into that matchup. And then a very weird brew of Hero Wraiths. It was Noxus Hero Wraiths, but the champions, it had Hecarim in it as well, but all I saw was a bunch of Fearsome Spiders, some Wraiths, and double Harrowing, I think they had. And honestly, that game was fairly easy. It was a pretty dominant showing, which is surprising because Hero Race was a deck that kind of gave Veimer Control some issues earlier, but that could be the difference between Noxus and Targon, is that the Pale Cascade kind of makes it easier for their stuff to survive your removal, and it's much easier for them to punish your removal or choice of removal and trying to line up things right. Whereas with no Targon, Mystic Shot's going to carry a lot more weight. So that could be why that went so well. Losses, however, against a lot of meta decks. That's the big problem. Losses against Bilgewater Burn. That one was very close. Go Hard. That one was very close. They got pretty lucky towards the end, if I remember correctly. Plaza Scouts, which splits that, I think, to, 1-1 on the Plaza Scouts matchup, which is not too surprising. That I expected to be a bad matchup. And 2 losses to IT Zoe Lee Sin. I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail in a bit, actually. Oh, and a loss to Ash Sejuani, the Frostbite Midrange deck. We're going to talk about that later as well. Basically, again, so Bilgewater, Go Hard, and Plaza Scout losses all came to the Solari Sunforger deck, which is a little bit weird because those are the matchups where you expect it to carry a little more weight. But I think they had the Noxian Fervor trick for Sunforger, or I just never saw Sunforger, and their clock was incredibly fast, so we just weren't quite able to stabilize. I actually think that matchup is fairly decent for us because we have so much life gain and a lot of removal. So I don't think that's actually necessarily a bad matchup, but they definitely they had to get a good run of it, and the deck kind of stumbled a little bit for me. I was missing units, and then by the time I got to life gain, it just wasn't enough to make it through Captain Farron. So yeah, that's a matchup I think we're fairly good into, but got a little unlucky. Same goes for the Go Hard matchup. That should be fairly good too, because all of their units are pretty easy to kill. We have a lot of life gain to deal with their Go Hard. Go Hard itself isn't that effective against us. Even the board wipe, if we can level up Vi, she's not going to die to it. I think they did have a Vengeance for my Vi, though, which prevented the level up, and I think they might have even stolen the win off that, where I went for lethal with Vi, and they happened to have Vengeance as their last, like, one of their last 2 cards. So I think that matchup's pretty good for us, too, but got a little unlucky on that. Teemo Lock is a great matchup for us. That's just phenomenal. That's just going to go well. We can kill Teemo very easily. We can kill Sejuani very easily. If we're worried about them using Sejuani to lock us out of damage, we can always hush her or whatever. So that's a decent matchup. Plaza Scouts I definitely expect to be a challenge. I was surprised we were able to win the game in On the Grind, because that's a matchup where board wipes are a premium, and we don't have them. Now, it is a lot better than it used to be prior to Cosmic Creation, because we can kill Plaza. So while Plaza's been added to the deck, that has slowed them down a little bit, which lets us fight evenly with them a lot more. And if we can Aftershock a Plaza, that's just backbreaking for that deck often. So that's where it's a little bit better, but definitely a disappointing deck from the show, or showing from the deck to end at 43% win rate. Might get better if I go back to the original list, so I did kind of tank it a bit by playing with the flex spots, so that's where we're at with that. Now, IT Zoe Lee Sin. I had 1 hush in the first game, and I had 2 hushes in the second game. And we lost those games, despite having incredibly fast starts, incredibly aggressive creatures, and an inability for my opponent to kill those creatures. And we lost. So that's kind of my segue into the general meta. Lee Sin needs to be reverted. I think that's a pretty uncontroversial statement at this point. I really loved what he did to the metagame when he came out, but the problem we're seeing is that this deck becomes really, really strong every single new expansion. It's just too hard to balance around Lee Sin. He needs to be deleted from the game, i.e. reverted back to his original version. Even then, I don't necessarily think we'd see him vanish, because the addition of Zenith Blade really made Lee Sin incredibly powerful, but basically it's so hard to counterplay around it. So, yeah, I mean, they just need to revert the changes on him. Lee Sin needs to be gone because he is absurdly problematic for the game. Just in general, I think most of the problems with where the game's at right now are entirely on the shoulders of that one card. I actually don't even think Zoe's that bad. She made the deck as oppressive as it is, because I've had some issues going into it with Bilgewater Burn, which should be a phenomenal matchup, but the problem is Zoe adds so much early game potency to the deck that now they can very easily stall out the early game, and then the Lee Sin late game is just unbeatable for many, many decks. We're going to talk about some of the decks that do beat it, but yeah, it's just incredibly hard to beat. As I mentioned with Veimer Control, I had double Hush in one game, and I lost to Lee Sin, because Bastion just makes it impossible, especially for Veimer Control. It doesn't have a lot of ways to take Spell Shield off at burst speed, and in fact, most decks don't have a way to take Spell Shield off at burst speed. So even though Hush should be, on paper, the best answer to Lee Sin, it's so easy for them to make that irrelevant, essentially, and that is the big problem with Lee Sin, is that playing around him is nearly impossible. It's incredibly difficult to do. And so that's just, yeah, he is the biggest problem in the metagame right now. And so personally, I am looking at decks that I think can at least handle Lee Sin to a certain degree, because I'm frankly tired of losing to a deck that you can't do anything about, even with the double Hushes. At least Hush can answer a Fiora, for example, but like Lee Sin, Hush does nothing. Because A, if they go straight to combat, they're going to have Dragon Roar on the stack, so even if you Hush, you might not die, but you're still going to have your unit bounce to hand, at the very least, so, and Lee Sin's going to live, so it's very hard to deal with him. He's definitely a problem, and they really need to honestly get rid of him. Run him back totally change him so he's not the big problem in the meta that he is. And then we might finally see more control decks come back and get a little bit of a more balanced meta, hopefully. But let's talk about decks. So first off, I am going to talk about Zoe Lee Sin because it's been a while since I've covered this deck. So we're going to look at it in a little bit of detail here and where I see most lists at now. Some people play with the numbers a bit. I even consider dropping a Spell Thief for a third Spacey Sketcher with this list. But I think the 3 Sparkle Flies is better than the alternative. Very hard for your opponent to deal with it if they're going the aggro route, and that's one of the best ways to beat Lee Sin. So basically preventing that from working is great. We've moved back to Deep Meditations, so pulling a lot of spells off of it. You're still not running 3, and we're running a lot more one-ofs, as you can see, or like small bits. Some people even run Starry, Starry, whatever the star chart is that Zoe creates. Some people are running a one-of in the deck. I personally don't like it, but I can understand why. Bastion, like I said, it's the only reason I lost with double Hush. I didn't even use Hush on... Well, I used a Hush on a Zoe early, and then I had a second Hush, and they had Bastion, so it didn't matter. Bastion's just that good. It's going to win you games that you have no right winning. So definitely worth running at least one Bastion, considering where the meta's at now. And then the Guiding Touches are still going to heal, but since I'm going 3 Sparkle Flies, we don't need quite as many Guiding Touches, because we're really setting up for a very powerful Sparkle Fly or Zoe with life gain to the entire team, gaining you a bunch. So that's where the deck's at. You just want to focus on the combo. Against aggro, you're going to want to keep lots of early things to slow down your opponent. It's going to be good to have life gain as well. Against control, Lee Sin's going to be very difficult for them to beat, especially if you can find Bastion with him. And you can also kind of run down control using Zoe, potentially. Against mid-range, kind of... That's really just go for the Lee Sin or bust. Just try to stall them long enough for you to build a Lee Sin they can't deal with, and then just kill them with it. So that's where you're looking at with those matchups. Now let's talk about some decks I could see beating Lee Sin, and the decks I'm kind of looking at for the next week or so. First off, Frostbite Midrange. This is kind of making a comeback, and I think it can be really good into the meta right now. And if you are at all familiar with the deck, you can see quite a number of things have occurred here. There's way more Frostbite. Double Flash Freeze with the double Harsh Winds, double Brittle Steel. You've got 3 Ice Veil Archers. And, of course, obviously, the 3 Ash, 2 Sejuani. Frostbite gets around a lot of problems. Bastion will still mess you up, but you can always do things like Ice Veil Archer to get around Bastion, or Ash Attack to get around Bastion. So this has a lot of ways to basically neuter Lee Sin without losing tempo, and basically being able to play it around most of the things Lee Sin can do. Besides that, it's just got a great board state. You can run down control decks very quickly. And the one of Captain Farron, I saw someone run this, and I saw a lot of other lists weren't running it. It's definitely worth running. Won a game last night just off the fact that those Decimates will close out games so quick against the right matchups. So one of Captain Farron I love. Maybe dropping a Babbling Bjerg for Captain Farron wasn't the right choice, but since Bjerg can get Sejuani, Ash, Avaros, and Hearthguard, Captain Farron, it kind of goes down in value because it's no longer a Tutor Ash as it often can be, or Tutor Ash or Sejuani. So that's it kind of went down in priority for me a little bit. I'm not 100% set on this list. I'm not sure if I want to run the Troll Chance or not, or if I want to boost the unit package. But both units, early units and Troll Chant, great answers for aggro. So against aggro, just try to outboard them, essentially. If you can start getting towards things like Trapper and the Yeti and the Hearthguard, they'll all be able to block and keep attacking, and your opponent's going to have to block them because it's a ton of damage and they can't just take it. The Frostbite will be really good for dealing with some of their late game threats or threats you can't deal with otherwise. Reckoning is a great board wipe against most aggro decks, so that's something to keep in mind. The Culling Strikes can also work, so just look to control the board against them and just tempo them out in the late game while trying not to lose too much health so you don't die to like Decimate or other burn spells. Mid-range, just try to beat them on board. Most other mid-range are going to be really weak to Reckoning. So Reckoning should be really, really good there. Trifarian Assessor is also good from the sense of being able to fill your hand out so you can out-card advantage them. Glory Seeker paired with Frostbite spells, very good for ripping apart their field. So that's another thing to look for. Frostbites, Reckonings, and then just trying to have the biggest units on board to deal with them. Ash is also great for ensuring that you can keep killing things every turn. So just look to outvalue their board, essentially. And you should be able to get under them fairly quickly, or at least just control the board and grind out the late game. Against control, try to be as fast as you can. We're not a particularly fast deck, but we can be. And then essentially, if you can get a lot of 5/5s out very quickly, their only answer is going to be Ruination, really. That's going to be good for them. So you can pretty much run them down with relative impunity because things like Withering Wail aren't going to line up well against you. Grasp of the Undying aren't going to line up well against you. So in that vein, you kind of want to avoid things like Glory Seeker, but it's not bad if you're playing on curve. Just keep in mind that they could have stuff like Vile Feast, and that will really shut down a lot of things. So things like Ice Veil, Archer are going to be about a bit weaker, but then things like Sentry are going to be good for drawing cards. Omen Hawk's a phenomenal start because A, you can start hitting them on turn 1, B, you're going to make it harder for the removal to line up against the next cards you draw. So that's the real thing you're looking for there. And then obviously Captain Farron, always a great answer to control. So look for things like that just to keep your engine running and make it as difficult as possible for them to remove your threats. Now, the last deck I want to talk about, which I also think is a decent answer for Zoe Lee Sin, is the other spectrum. So this deals with Zoe Lee Sin directly by frostbiting the threats to prevent them from gaining life, dealing damage, etc. The other answer is to just kill them. Just kill them quickly. Kill them very, very, very quickly. And this deck I was going to consider a couple weeks ago, and I played it and really didn't enjoy it. But that was the Teemo variant, and I have run into this deck a lot, and I've considered it a joke most times, and I barely beat it with Frostbite Midrange yesterday, despite having an insane board state against them, and an insane curve and draw, but it can do so much damage so quickly out of nowhere, and it can level up Twisted Fate really quick, which is also a problem for Frostbite Midrange. So I was very surprised by that. And I played Bilgewater Burn against this deck, and I've always laughed in that matchup because you just run them down, and they beat me. They were faster, and I had a really good hand that they had a hard time dealing with, and they beat me. So I have gained a new respect for this deck, and I think there's a lot you can do with it. I'm still not 100% sold on the list, but I do like this list a lot better than the version I was running before. Some people run Urchin, I'd rather run Jagged Butcher. We're not strictly a discard deck. In fact, the only things we're really going to easily discard is essentially the Ballistic Bot Ignitions. So I don't really think it's worth going heavy into the discard route. Even for the extra card draw, I prefer Jagged Butcher for an extremely aggressive 1-drop. Also, Twisted Fate is just way better than Teemo. It gives us a better late game. It gives us a second real win condition because Teemo does not work so well in that respect because he is very easy to kill. And without any other synergies with him, he's not really going to clock your opponent quickly. Whereas Twisted Fate can be a board wipe, it can stun their biggest attacker, their biggest defender, it can draw you more cards to keep the engine running. I'm really not sold on Mind Meld, but I'm going to have to try it a bit more before I can say for certainty. But generally speaking, this is just a really aggressive combo deck. You're going to draw cards often, that's going to give you access to things like Suit Up is going to be really, really good. We have a lot of elusives, so that's really, really good with Suit Up. Fizz can be very problematic for your opponent if they don't have great ways to remove him or if they don't have access to Hush. Zap Sprayfin is going to keep getting you cards as well, which could be great. We have a lot of burn between Get Exciteds and Mystic Shots. So, yeah, this is just a very potent, kind of more burn-based version of Fizzlusives for people who are aware of that deck. I used to be running that with Bilgewater Targon. Now it is definitely Bilgewater Piltover because a lot of these Piltover cards just work really well, and the deck is just a lot stronger with the addition of Twisted Fate and just way more card draw in this variant. So that's really strong, and the idea with Mind Meld is that you're going to have a lot of elusives, and now they're suddenly going to be really, really huge. So in the right matchups, that can be devastating. Against pretty much every deck, you're just going to want to go fast. That's ultimately what it is. Just try to keep clocking your opponent as quickly as you can, because you are going to be able to win games out of nowhere with this. Try to be as aggressive as you can. Elusives means you're probably going to have an easier time forcing damage through. You can throw away stuff like Pool Shark or Jagged Butcher pretty easily if you have to. Same even goes with Ballistic Bot. If your opponent does have fast clock, don't be afraid to block and just use your powerful elusives to close out the game against them. Always keep in mind that the burn can work as removal, and it can work as a win condition. Try to make sure you're proactively looking for which one's going to be best for the current matchup. Iterative improvement means that we're going to be able to keep things getting stronger and better. We can take a simple 1-1 and now it's a 2-2 elusive. You can make a Zap Sprayfin, now a 3-3, and it's still going to draw you something. Wiggly Burblefish is going to be good because it's going to probably be free. Yeah, just keeping in mind how synergistic this is, and just try to make your elusives as threatening as possible to run the game out. And yeah, just try to run faster than every deck. Into aggro, you can start considering using your burn as removal, but pretty much in every matchup, you're just going to want to try to be faster than them. Twisted Fate is good to aggro for trying to slow them down while keeping your clock going, so just keep that in mind. And again, Twisted Fate can be good against stuff like Frostbite Midrange, where the stun is going to be very potent. So yeah, those are the decks for this week. So thanks for watching the video. There's deck links for all three of these in the description below if you want to try them out yourself. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe for more videos just like it.